I ran back and forth, trying to make sure everything was perfect. I thought Donna and I had everything planned well and everything was ready for my wife's 39th surprise birthday. But of course, last-minute changes and problems arose. My wife, her best friend Donna, and I planned, schemed, lied, and overworked ourselves to make sure her birthday was a complete surprise. We wrote invitations and sent them to all our friends and family, asking them not to say a word to my wife, but inviting them to come and celebrate. We rented a large room in one of the best hotels in our city and decorated it for the celebration. Sandy is the love of my life, and she is still as beautiful and sexy as she was on our wedding day. We met in college and dated for almost a year before I proposed to her. We have been happily married for over 5 years and recently started discussing the possibility of having children. She works for a large manufacturing company that makes machines for other industries, and I work at a local distribution center. We are not rich, but we have a comfortable life. Being a typical man, I realize that I have no idea how to show her how much she means to me, other than sometimes giving her a box of chocolates or a bouquet of flowers. But this is clearly not enough to show how much I love and appreciate her. I needed something special, and this was going to be it. Her best friend and I did our best. Of course, I decided too late that this was what I wanted to do and shared my plan with her best friend. We were in a hurry to get everything ready in time for the event and make it really beautiful and special. We had to call each other many times late at night because we were remembering something else we needed to do or something to make it even more special. We met at least twice a week for coffee or lunch to compare notes and check to-do lists and programs of each of us. We both really got into it and worked hard, but it was for a very good reason. She was worth it. We planned a surprise party for Friday night to start at 6:00 p.m. This gave everyone time to get done, and then I would tell my wife that I was taking her to dinner, and we would show up in this hotel room between 18:30 and 19:00. Her best friend would be at the venue early to greet the guests and make sure everything was ready, while I would wait for my wife at home and take her to the hotel. The perfect plan, and then everything went to pieces. She usually gets home around 5:30 p.m., depending on traffic. She didn't show up until 5:30 p.m., so maybe she stopped to get gas, or there was a big traffic jam. Then 6 p.m. came and Sandy was still missing. Now I started to worry. I called Donna and told her that Sandy hadn't arrived home yet, but she told me not to worry. We weren't planning on arriving until 7 p.m., and there was still plenty of time. When 6:15 p.m. came, I started to panic, thinking maybe she had been in a car accident, and decided I needed to call her. I call her cell phone, and she doesn't answer. The call goes to voicemail. A few minutes later, I received a text message from Sandy. It reads, "I saw you talking on the phone in a whisper several times over the past 2 weeks and wondered who you were talking to. Finally, I heard you mention Donna's name and began to listen. I realized that you and my best friend have talked to each other quite a lot at night for the last 2 weeks. I confirmed my suspicions when I checked your phone log. When I asked you about it, you denied it. Everything became clear to me when I saw you and Donna together at lunch on Wednesday, and when I asked what you were doing at lunch that day, you said you missed lunch because of work. When I asked Donna, she also lied to me. I know you're dating. I'm hurt. I'm devastated, and I can't understand how you could do this to me and my best friend. I can't bear the thought of being around you this weekend. I need time to think. I'm coming home Sunday night, and we need to talk." Oh my God, where did this come from? How could she come up with such an idea? I didn't cheat on her. It's funny. I immediately try to call her, but the call goes to voicemail again. I left her a message asking her to call me back as there was a big misunderstanding. I called Donna and told her what happened. She says there's no point in her calling Sandy if she thinks we're having an affair. She reports that Sandy's mother has arrived and will ask her to call and explain everything. A few minutes later, Donna calls back and says Sandy turned off her cell phone. So what's now? I drive to the banquet hall, trying to figure out where she could have gone, and coming up with some excuse to explain to all the guests why the birthday girl didn't come and won't be at the party today. I arrive and get together with Donna and her husband, and we come up with a plausible, if slightly awkward, ad. When we are sure that all the guests have arrived, I get everyone's attention and make an announcement. I apologize to everyone and say that Donna and I tried really hard to throw this surprise party for the love of my life, but we forgot to invite her. Of course, everyone laughs, but then I explain that my wife and I had a misunderstanding, and now she is not talking to me, but I am trying to contact her and hope that she will join us soon. I ask everyone to enjoy the evening, and we can celebrate without her if we have to. A little strange, but what else could I do? The evening did not go well, and everyone was wondering what kind of misunderstanding could have happened for my wife to miss her own birthday. I came up with all sorts of excuses, but none of them worked well. The party ended early, and everyone started to leave. I tried calling Sandy all day Saturday and until noon on Sunday, but her cell phone was still off. Sandy came home around 6:00 p.m. on Sunday evening. I was sitting on the couch, and by this time, I was more than a little annoyed. Donna and I tried our best to make Friday a special day for her. And did she run away because of some ridiculous idea that we were cheating? What the heck? When Sandy walked in and saw me sitting on the living room couch, she paused for a moment and then went upstairs to the bedroom. I brought all her birthday gifts home. They were still unopened in the front room. If she noticed them, she didn't say anything. I expected her to freshen up and come downstairs to talk, but an hour later I got up and knocked on the door. I asked if she was ready to talk. I was determined to explain to her how she had ruined an entire weekend for me, made me look like a fool and embarrassed me in front of my family and friends, and let them down by not showing up for her own birthday. She was in trouble. Instead of answering, she shouted through the door that she was not ready to talk yet, and that I should leave her alone, and, by the way, that tonight, and possibly for a long time, I would sleep in the guest bedroom. I stood there for a few more minutes, and then decided that I didn't want to have a conversation, or shout, through a closed door. The next morning, I was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when my wife came down the stairs, dressed for work, left the house, and drove away in the car. Okay, what now? I got dressed and went to work, but began to get seriously angry. I didn't do anything wrong. I put in the work, but everything I did was hard. I couldn't concentrate, and it felt like I had to do everything twice to get it right. Finally, the workday came to an end, and I headed home, wondering what awaited me. Sandy was preparing dinner when I walked in the door. I usually arrive home a few minutes before her. All of her birthday gifts were still in the front room, although it looked like some had been rearranged. At least she noticed them. I went into the kitchen, took a beer from the refrigerator, and didn't say a word. She didn't even look at me. I went into the living room and sat on the sofa. A few minutes later, Sandy came in and sat down across from me. She looked at me for a few seconds and sighed heavily. She looked nervous. She said she was sorry. Aboutna said she turned off her cell phone last Friday because she knew I would be calling, and she didn't want to hear my voice at that moment. She said she turned it on Sunday afternoon and listened to the voicemails, but didn't believe such a weak, surprise birthday story. She pointed out that I had never given her a birthday party before, and it wasn't my style at all. When she saw all the gifts on Sunday afternoon, she even thought that I had bought a bunch of gifts and wrapped them to make it look like there was actually a party. She didn't believe it until a couple of her colleagues at work started talking to her about the surprise party and how she wasn't there. They assumed we had a big fight and I left, and they were worried about her. She said she was ashamed and tried to explain it away as a big misunderstanding, but she wasn't sure they believed it. She said she noticed the late phone calls and became suspicious, especially when I casually brushed them off and was evasive. We shared our phone passwords with each other, and she checked my call log and saw that it was Donna, her best friend, calling me often late at night. What was she supposed to think? She said that I seemed absorbed in something and barely noticed her nearby. The final straw was the day she went to lunch and saw Donna and I eating lunch together. She said she was watching us, and it definitely seemed like you were up to something and also laughing and having a good time. Everything worked out that you were dating. She said she was angry, hurt, devastated, and panicked. Her mind was in all directions, and she just couldn't think clearly. She was an emotional mess and needed to take some time to process everything. She thought I was going to divorce her and didn't know if she could move on without me. With all this going on, her birthday completely slipped her mind. It didn't really hit her until she started talking to her coworkers about the birthday today. I am so sorry. We never hide anything from each other, and you were so secretive and evasive. And also the later one's calls and conversations with my best friend. I was broken and scared, and by Friday I was no longer thinking clearly and was an emotional wreck. I was sure I was losing you. I wanted to die. The longer I listened, the more my anger subsided. I could understand why she might think I was having an affair. On the one hand, how could she even think for a second that I was cheating on her? Didn't I always tell her and show my love? But she's right. We never hide anything from each other. We have always been open and honest with each other. Damn, what a mess. She continued, I'm so ashamed that I ever doubted you, and after you went to so much trouble to surprise me on my birthday. I really don't deserve such a wonderful husband. I am so sorry. I love you so much. I looked at her, the love of my life, and my heart melted. Because you are such a wonderful wife, lover, and best friend, I wanted to do something special for you to show how much I love you. I should have told you my plan and asked you to act surprised when you arrived at the banquet hall. I guess I really ruined your birthday over the weekend. She replied, No, it's my fault that I ever doubted you, and I'm so sorry for missing out on such a special occasion with my beloved husband. I told her that her best friend Donna was also involved, and I couldn't have done it without her. She wanted to make it special for her too, which is why there were so many late phone calls and lunch meetings with her. We wanted everything to be perfect. Sandy stood up and said, I need to call and apologize and hope I didn't lose my best friend. We went to bed that night and made slow, tender love. We soon returned to our normal routine, and I felt content again. We talked like before, sat close to each other on the couch like before, and life was good again. About 2 weeks after that, Sandy called and said she would be home later than usual. It turns out that she was having problems with a large client due to delivery problems. She was part of the team that had to immediately solve this problem and satisfy the client's needs. When she returned home about 3 hours after her usual time, she explained that a delivery to a large client had not been as ordered, resulting in lost time and production for their client. A team consisting of representatives from several departments in her company was assigned to solve the problem and correct the situation. She was included in the team to clarify the problem and let the client know that they were working on a resolution quickly. The following week, a similar problem occurred again with another customer. Sandy's team was again able to solve the problem, but it took several late nights. I hoped that soon everything would return to normal so that we could spend all the evenings together, but this did not happen. It appears that the company's coup wanted the team to stay together and work to understand what happened to determine the adjustments needed to prevent future problems with customers. Although this meant several late nights for team meetings, Sandy was proud to be selected for this very important team. Sandy continued to work late several nights a week, and she said they were documenting their findings and making some recommendations for changes to the production and delivery processes, and it shouldn't take too long. I looked forward to having my loving wife at home with me every day. About a week later, I met an old friend. His wife worked with Sandy, and they used to live in our area, but when their youngest child went to college, they sold the house and moved to the other side of town. I hadn't seen them in a couple years, so I chatted with my husband while his wife was picking out paint for a project in their house. She found the right color and joined our conversation. I casually mentioned that I was waiting for the company she and Sandy worked for to sort out their production and shipping issues so Sandy wouldn't have to keep working late. She looked confused and said she hadn't heard of any problems, but will ask on Monday morning. I asked if she worked a lot of overtime, to which she replied in the negative and added that she had not heard of any colleagues having to stay late at work. I assumed that maybe it was just Sandy's team, but the more I thought about it, the more doubts I had. This continued to bother me, and to satisfy my curiosity, I drove to Sandy's work, found her car, and parked far enough away, but still close enough to see her as she approached the car. It was a Thursday evening, one of the days when she usually arrived home 2 to 3 hours late due to team meetings. I was surprised to see Sandy leave the work building and head to her car at the usual end of work time. I turned on the car and followed her, leaving a few cars between us so she wouldn't notice me. She headed across town in the opposite direction of our house, and I continued to follow her. I'm not very good at this spy stuff, and of course I lost her when the traffic light at the intersection suddenly changed to red and she got through, but I didn't. I couldn't catch up with her and got lost in traffic. I was very upset, but I began to calm down by thinking of all the possible reasons why she could have left earlier. I was sure she would tell me everything about her day, which would explain why she left work at her usual time rather than staying for the team meeting, and why she was driving in the opposite direction from our house. My anxiety grew every hour until my wife returned home. She arrived at the drive in about 3 hours after her usual finish time, but at the time she usually arrived home from team meetings. She looked tired when she walked in the door, and I asked how her day was. She said the day had been busy and tiring. I asked how the team meeting went, and she said everything went as usual. She said they reviewed their findings and recommendations, made some adjustments, and brought them back for revision. I was amazed. She just lied to me. I stood looking at her, and she asked if everything was okay. I came to my senses and said that everything was fine. I just remembered what I forgot to do at work. She continued chatting while we ate dinner. I ate little because my stomach was churning from nerves. I didn't understand what was happening, but I was determined to figure it out. The next day, I looked in the telephone directory and randomly selected a private investigator whose office was close to my work. I made an appointment for the same day at 16 Zen. I left work early, wondering on the way to his office that maybe I was going too far and should have canceled the meeting. But I didn't do this. Since I had already arrived, it was worth talking to him. His name was Bill, and he looked to be in his 50s with short gray hair and piercing eyes. It seemed to me that he was not missing anything. I told Bill that maybe I was being paranoid and it was probably nothing, but I just wanted to check on my wife to calm my nerves. I said I didn't like spying on my wife, but there had been some strange things going on lately and something didn't seem right. I told him my story, not mentioning the surprise birthday because I didn't think it had anything to do with recent events, but simply explained my encounter with a former neighbor, my wife's obvious lies, and my general suspicions. Bill said he understood and thought he could help me. He said he has a recently retired police officer who works part-time for him, and he could assign her to watch my wife at her usual time off work on Tuesday and Thursday since those seem to be the days she usually returns home late. If she left early, she would follow her and see what she could find out. He said she would start next Tuesday and give me a preliminary report by the end of next week. Since it was just one private investigator and just a few hours over a couple of days, it wouldn't cost as much as I thought, and it would be worth allaying any concerns I had. The next week, everything was fine, with Sandy coming home late on Tuesday and Thursday due to team meetings. On Friday morning, Bill called me and asked me to come to his office after work to discuss the preliminary report. I said no problem, and he figured they didn't find anything. Otherwise, Bill would have asked me to come earlier. I arrived at the private investigator's office around 5:15 p.m., and he was already waiting for me and invited me into his office. Bill introduced me to Pamela, saying she was the one handling my case. Pamela introduced herself and explained that she had retired from the local police a couple of years ago, but wanted to stay involved, and Bill had been her friend when they were both on the force. She worked for Bill part-time. Pamela looked me in the eye and told me she had bad news. Looks like my wife had a lover. I was shocked, and I must have turned pale because she stopped and asked if I wanted a glass of water. I took the water and started breathing again. She said that since she only followed my wife for a couple of evenings and saw her enter the apartment where she spent several hours, and after leaving saw her kiss a young man, it could be assumed that they were in a romantic relationship, but she had not observed anything else, so the possibility remained that it was an innocent meeting. No one in the room believed it, but she was right. I really didn't know what my wife and this man were doing behind closed doors. I asked what his name was, and she said she didn't know because she wasn't assigned to identify him. Bill explained that I had asked for minimal supervision, and therefore he did not take further steps until our conversation. He then outlined the various services he could offer and the estimated cost of each. By this time I was in shock and had to find out what my wife was doing. I asked for information about who this guy was, where he worked, and any information available about him. I also requested video and audio of their meetings if possible. Bill agreed and said he would call me around the end of next week to discuss the week's results. It would cost a lot more, but now I had to know. I went out to my car and sat in it for a few minutes, just looking out the window. Finally, I started the car and drove to a park near our house and sat on a bench under a tree, trying to get my brain to work. I couldn't believe that my wife, my best friend, my everything, could cheat on me. We always told each other everything. I am completely satisfied with her jerk. I couldn't believe it was possible that she could do this to me, to us, to our marriage. There was never a doubt in my mind that we would spend our golden years together, holding hands, reminiscing about our long life together. My cell phone rang, and I answered without thinking. My voice was barely audible when I answered, and my wife asked where I was. I looked around and noticed for the first time that it was dark, and for a moment I forgot where I was. It took a few seconds to remember. I told her that I had to finish some work in the office and stopped for a couple of beers with colleagues. I apologized for not calling and warning her, but I just lost track of time. I told her that I would be home soon. She chided me for not calling and said that my dinner was cold and I would have to reheat it in the microwave. I apologized again and hung up. I sat a little longer and tried to pull myself together, and then headed home. Sandy left a plate of food for me to heat up while she watched one of her favorite TV shows. I was glad she didn't come into the kitchen to talk to me because she would have known right away that there was something seriously wrong with me. I had eaten almost nothing and looked into the living room to tell my wife that I was tired and was going to bed early. She didn't even turn to me. She just continued watching her show and said, "Okay." I pretended to be asleep when she came to bed. I got up early, even though I didn't sleep much all night, and started working on some small projects around the house. My wife came out onto the patio and told me she was going shopping and would be back later in the day. I was able to avoid her for the rest of the weekend, and I don't think she noticed anything unusual about me. I've been in a fog all this weekend. The next week, I left for work early every morning. I was finally able to pull myself together enough to act somewhat normally, at least enough that Sandy wouldn't notice anything unusual. She worked late again on Tuesday and Thursday nights and came home in a good mood. I was devastated, imagining what she could do with Seno Guy. Maybe I was wrong, and there was a reasonable explanation for it all, but deep down I knew my world was falling apart around me. Friday finally arrived, and I left work for half the day. I couldn't take it anymore and called Bill saying I needed to know, and he said to come at 1 p.m., and he would have a preliminary report of the week's activities. I arrived at his office at 12:30 and waited until a little before 1 when Bill invited me into his office. I knew this was bad when Bill started the conversation by saying that they had gotten quite a bit of information, and it was graphic, and I should consider just listening to the summary from him rather than watching the videos. I told him I had to know everything. He then began his standard talk about how I shouldn't do anything irrational or illegal, and that I needed time to absorb the information and get my emotions under control before reacting. He made me sign a document releasing him and his firm from any liability for my actions as a result of the information I received. I signed wherever he pointed without reading or looking. A TV and VCR were installed in the conference room, and it began playing the video. Bill or his employee were somehow able to get into this man's apartment and install several cameras to record video and audio. Bill explained the dates and times my wife came to this man's apartment. I watched as tears streamed down my face. I was only able to watch about 30 minutes of the first video before I asked to turn it off. Bill said the rest of that day and the following Thursday were about the same. He told me that the man's name was George Ames, and he worked in the same place as my wife. He was 28 years old and started working there about a year ago. Bill said they didn't try to interview any of my wife's co-workers to try to find out how long the affair had been going on, but could make a pretty reasonable guess that it started shortly before my wife started working late. I told him that was enough and thanked him by paying the remaining amount I owed him. I tried to prepare myself for this, but can you really prepare? Sandy was my world, my rock, my reason to live. I can't believe she could do this. What could she say in her defense? Does she love me at all? I knew I should have waited until next week and talked to a lawyer before confronting Sandy, but I didn't think I could make it through the weekend without blowing up. I was mentally and emotionally exhausted and felt like it couldn't get any worse, so I decided to face it and let it be what it was. I called Sandy at work, which I'd never done before, and she immediately asked what was wrong, and I lied to her, saying that a work colleague was retiring and a few of us guys were going to toast his health, and that she didn't cook dinner for me and didn't wait. I might get home late. This was unusual for me, but she thanked me for calling, told me to be careful, and told me that she loved me. I did go to a bar where I sometimes stopped for a couple of beers, but this evening I had more than a couple. The bartender eventually refused to give me a drink, so I stopped at a convenience store down the road, bought a couple 6-packs, and drove to a park in our neighborhood, drinking until midnight. I drove home slowly and fell onto the sofa, falling asleep immediately. In the morning, I woke up under the covers and the house was quiet. There was a note on the kitchen table from my wife saying that she had gone shopping for a few hours so as not to disturb me, and we needed to talk about my drinking and driving with a love you message at the end. Yes, we really had a serious conversation ahead of us. I prepared a large pot of coffee and a light breakfast and prepared for the end of my world. I had my laptop open on the kitchen table with some of the more explicit photos in the folder. I was shaking with emotion, not out of anger, but knowing that after today I might never experience happiness in my life again. Sandy pulled into the driveway around 2 p.m. and entered the house with several bags from the store. She put them down and said I should have had a lot of fun last night because I looked terrible. I just looked at her for a few seconds, and she must have seen me think something serious is about to happen. She became serious and asked, "What happened? What happened?" I told her to sit down. We need to talk. She started to get nervous, but sat quietly. First, I asked her if she loved me. She looked me straight in the eye and thought for a moment before saying, "With all my heart, I have always loved and will always love only you." I looked at her for a while and neither of us said anything, both of us afraid of what would happen in the next few minutes. I asked Sandy if she remembered our wedding day and the words she said when she said her vows. By then, she had turned very pale and looked frightened. I shouted, "Do you remember your vows?" She seemed to awaken from her trance and began to sob. She continued to sob for several minutes before she was able to pull herself together. She said she loved me and would always love me. I asked how she could say these words and cheat on me behind my back. She collapsed again, and I stood up to get a beer and give her time to calm down. I became increasingly angry as all the emotions I had been holding inside began to take over. But with a strength I didn't know I had, I was able to pull myself together. I sat down and gave her time to recover. Her sobs turned into sniffles, and she couldn't look me in the eye. She said, "It's not what you think. You need to let me explain." I turned on the video and turned the laptop towards her so she could see. Her eyes widened and she opened her mouth in a silent scream. She watched the video for about 5 minutes before she screamed loudly and ran to the downstairs bathroom. I was about to take a sip of beer, but realized that the bottle was empty and stood up to get another. But my hands were shaking so much that I decided that I had had enough and that I needed to remain as calm and sober as possible. She stayed in the bathroom for about 30 minutes before she stumbled out on unsteady legs and returned to her seat. She looked terrible. She's looked at me with sad eyes and said that she was sorry and that she never meant to hurt me. She asked if I would allow her to explain herself and promised to be completely honest and tell me everything. She said I deserved it and then added, "I'm glad it's over." This last statement really surprised me, so I decided I wanted to hear what she had to say. I didn't think anything could save our marriage or make me hate her less at the moment, but hey, you never know. So I said I wanted to hear her story and maybe start to understand how she could do this to me, to us, to throw away our marriage. She began to sob again, but quickly pulled herself together. She said, "Do you remember about 3 months ago when I thought you were cheating on me with my best friend Donna? I didn't know that you two were planning and organizing a surprise birthday for me. I thought you were dating and I was going to lose you. I heard you whispering on the phone to someone in the evenings, and when I found out that it was Donna, I began to suspect. When I asked you about it, you kind of brushed it off and acted like it was nothing. This really bothered me because we were always open and honest with each other, and you were clearly hiding something from me. I started to worry that I was going to lose you, and then when I saw you at dinner together, laughing and whispering to each other, I was devastated. But I still couldn't believe that you would hurt me like that. But when I asked you about this evening, you said that maybe I was mistaken and it was someone else. Then I realized that you don't love me anymore and are going to leave me for someone else." The next day was Friday, and I could barely function all day. I couldn't concentrate. Finally, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore and ran to the break room because I knew there would be no one there. I stood looking out the window, sobbing, when I felt someone touch my shoulder and ask if everything was okay. I turned around and it was George. George Ames started working for the company about a year ago. He's a nice young man, cheerful, caring, and easy to talk to. You could even say that we flirted sometimes, but it was never serious or provocative. I hugged him, and he hugged me, and I cried on his shoulder. He just held me until I cried. When I calmed down, we sat down and I poured my heart out to him, telling him that the man I loved with all my heart was cheating on me and was going to leave me for my best friend. He listened and then asked if I was sure about it, and I said yes. I said I don't know what to do. I couldn't go home and run into you, knowing that you didn't love me anymore and were going to leave. I said I had nowhere to go and that I wasn't even sure I could drive. I asked him to take me to the hotel so I could check in for the weekend and maybe work something out. He refused and said that I should not be alone at such a moment and that I would go to his house. He said that he had a 2-room apartment, and that way he could look after me until I calmed down and started thinking rationally. He later told me that he was afraid I might hurt myself if I was left alone, and maybe he was right. I wasn't really thinking clearly at that moment. We left work early, and on the way to his apartment, I sent you a message saying that I knew about your connection, but then I received your message and immediately turned off my phone. I was so angry at you. Of course, later, when I found out that you and Donna were planning a surprise birthday party for me, I don't know how I could have been so stupid as to believe that you could hurt me like that. But at that moment, I couldn't think rationally. We arrived at his apartment, and he helped me inside. I sat down on the sofa and started crying again. George sat down next to me and held my hand the entire time until I calmed down again. I felt like my world was collapsing. The person I trusted most in the whole world betrayed me, and my heart ached. When I calmed down again, George brought me a glass of wine. He let me chat and just sat next to me, holding my hand and telling me that he was here for me. It was reassuring to know that someone nearby helps me get through all the pain. I was lonely, but at least someone was there to help me cope with the crisis. George asked if I was hungry, but I couldn't even think about food. We drank a few more glasses of wine, and I finally started to calm down and cry less. We sat together in silence for a few minutes when he turned to me and kissed me tenderly on the lips. I was shocked, but didn't back down. He stopped and looked into my eyes, and then leaned down and kissed me again. This time I kissed him back. It was as if a fire had ignited inside me. All the raw emotions of the last few days surfaced, and I desperately clung to him. He took me to his bedroom, and we had sex. This was not an act of love. This was emotional, greedy, raw sex. I spent the rest of the night and most of the next day in his bed. I finally got dressed and came back to you on Sunday afternoon. I was amazed, in shock. He jumped up and ran out of the house. I jumped into the car and drove off. I didn't know where I was going, but I ended up in a park near my house. I remembered that weekend. She never said where she was that weekend. I assumed she went to a hotel. Now I found out that she spent the weekend having sex with her boyfriend. She cheated on me for a lot longer than I thought. Maybe she's been fooling me all this time. Who is this woman, and how could I not see who she really is all these years? I drove all night, turning everything over in my head. I found out she cheated on me, and now I found out it started on her birthday weekend. I was racking my brain trying to arrange something special for her, and all this time she was planning to spend the weekend with her asshole. My mind was spinning, and I couldn't form a single rational thought or understand how we got to where we are today. I noticed the sunrise and looked around to find myself in my driveway. He got out of the car and went inside. My wife was sitting on the couch, and she also looked like she hadn't slept all night. In fact, she hadn't even changed her clothes, and she smelled terrible. I stared at her and told her so, and told her to go upstairs to shower and change clothes. I walked into the kitchen, and it looked like she opened the envelope and looked at all the photos from my private investigator. I can't tell if she watched the video. I made coffee and decided that I had had enough, and we needed to talk about the divorce and how we would divide our assets. As she walked down the stairs for her third cup of coffee and sat down in her chair, she began telling her story from where she left off the night before. She spoke in a monotone voice, without emotion, looking at the table and telling her story as if it belonged to someone else. I had no intention of listening to her anymore, but I found myself listening intently, unable to stop. She said she was so embarrassed and remorseful for her actions that weekend, but was also happy to know that I still loved her and had no plans to leave her. She even forgot that she spent the weekend with George and what they did. She was incredibly happy that I was back. Nothing else mattered. It wasn't until Monday, when she came to work and saw George, that she remembered their time together. At the first opportunity, she pulled George into an empty meeting room and apologized for her actions, and while she appreciated his support, it was a mistake. She talked about the surprise birthday party and all the misunderstandings and how happy and relieved she was to find out how wrong she had been about everything and that she was back with her husband. She expected George to be happy for her, but he wasn't as happy as she expected. She told him that she would always value him as a true friend who was there when she needed him, but they shouldn't have let it turn into a romantic relationship and it wouldn't happen again. She told him that she loved her husband with all her heart and would be the best wife for him for the rest of his life. I wasn't sure about all of this, but as I thought back on that weekend, I replayed it many times in my mind and could see how she could come to the conclusion that I was cheating on her. In the same circumstances, I would probably do the same thing. Late calls, lunches, evasiveness, lack of complete frankness, as always between us. Yes, I then decided that I could understand her point of view and how this could happen. Sandy continued her story in the same lifeless and matter-of-fact tone. George and I were still friends, and I still really appreciated that he was there for me in my time of need, and there wasn't anything inappropriate until a few weeks later. George asked me to go to lunch with him, and I agreed. I rarely left work for lunch, but I would if the weather was good or I needed a break from work. We went to a small cafe nearby and talked about work and friends. We haven't talked about our weekend since I returned to work the following Monday and told him it would never happen again. George Togg. Yes, he started telling me that he had recently broken up with his girlfriend. In fact, it happened after our weekend together, and he felt very lonely and depressed. He said he had never felt as close to anyone as he did that weekend with me. He seemed really depressed, and I tried to cheer him up. Told him he was a very handsome young man, and I was sure there was a special girl somewhere just for him. He just needed to go out and find her. My positive talk seemed to help him, and we returned to work. George began coming up to my cube more often to talk and compliment my clothes and appearance. I didn't immediately understand what was happening. I thought we were just close friends. But I noticed that he was smiling less, and several of our colleagues noticed my attention to the changes in George, so much so that some began to worry. One day, I invited George to dinner and asked how he was doing, and I told him that several of us were starting to get worried when he told me that everything was bad for him. He didn't go anywhere except to work and sat at home, watching TV. He said that he felt very lonely. He had problems communicating with people, and I was the only one he was around. He felt worthy of life. Now I was really starting to worry. He was clearly deeply depressed and began to withdraw from everyone and everything. I told him I would always be there and ready to talk to him at any time. He said he appreciated it, but we couldn't talk at work when there were a lot of people around. He asked if I could come to his apartment for an hour a couple of times a week just to talk. He thought it would really help him get back on his feet and start feeling better. I said that I can't do this. I'm married, and especially after what happened before, I can't come to his house. I offered to meet for lunch a few times a week to sit and help him with his depression. He got angry, jumped up and said that he was there when I needed someone. And now, when he needs help, I just leave him. "You're such a friend," I said. He shouted and left in anger. This really got to me, and I thought about it for a long time. I don't know what I would have done if George hadn't been there when I needed him and he was willing to help me. Despite the sex, and I really can't put all the blame on him for it. He acted like a true gentleman and a good friend when I was desperate. I felt like I had to at least try to help him. I approached George and said that we would try, but at the first hint of something inappropriate, I would leave and never come back. He smiled back, and I knew it meant a lot to him to have a friend when he really needed one. This was the first time I lied to you and made up a story about a problem with a client. I followed George to his apartment. We went in, poured a glass of wine, and sat on the sofa to talk. At first, he was very sad, but the more we talked, the more he began to smile and participate in the conversation. 2 hours flew by, and I said that I had to go. He was sad again, but I got up, hugged him, and said that we would meet again on Thursday evening, and he perked up. He thanked me many times and said that I helped him a lot. I was really pleased. George felt better the next day at work, but by Thursday he was back to his old gloomy and withdrawn self. I followed him back to his apartment, and we sat and talked and laughed, and he was a completely different person. He thanked me again many times. I felt like I had truly done something important in his life and began to repay him for everything he had done for me. The following Tuesday, I met him again at his apartment, and we talked. I told him that I thought he was feeling much better and that we should stop meeting at his apartment. He looked shocked and started crying. He jumped up and ran to his bedroom. He told me to leave, that I was not a real friend, and that I didn't care if he lived or died. I followed him into the bedroom, walked up behind him and hugged him, telling him it wasn't like that. I truly cared for him and will always be there for him. Then I noticed a gun lying on the bedside table. I've never seen him before. This really scared me, and I started to realize how depressed George was. He turned and hugged me, crying into my shoulder. I held him tightly, letting him cry. He started sobbing, pulled away, and looked into my eyes. then leaned down and kissed me. I kissed back. I knew he was suffering, and it seemed like I was the only one who could help him deal with his pain. In hindsight, I should have encouraged him to seek professional help, but at that moment I was there and he needed me. We had sex, and after that evening, we started meeting on Tuesday and Thursday nights, talking a little and then having sex. It wasn't love. In fact, I don't remember much about sex. It wasn't great, not even good. He definitely never made me feel the way you make me feel. But I enjoyed the moments after sex when we held each other tightly and he seemed content and happy for a short time. I felt like I owed him these short moments of happiness for everything he had done for me. Believe it or not, last Thursday night, I told him I wouldn't come to his apartment anymore. I told him that although I wanted to help him and be there for him, I loved my husband and what I was doing was wrong. I said that I can no longer be with anyone other than my husband. I told him he needed professional help to overcome his depression. I know that what I did to you was terrible, and that I am a terrible person. I don't deserve you, and even though I love you and have never loved anyone the way I love you, I know that what I did probably ruined the best thing I've ever had in my life. I pray to God that this never happens, and I still can't believe I allowed myself to justify my actions in any way. You deserve better, much better, and I have failed you. I will do whatever you ask, but I hope you will remember the many years we spent together before all this. These were the happiest years of my life, and I believe that they were also the happiest years. I know we lost them, and because of me we can't go back to those days. But I hope you can see a way to consider moving forward together and creating new happy memories. I had to ask, do you love him? No, I never loved him. I saw a man who was suffering a lot, and this man was there for me when I desperately needed someone, and I wanted to be there for him. I approached it completely wrong, and in trying to help a friend, I hurt the love of my life. You're the only person I ever wanted to spend my life with, and I can't understand how I could begin to jeopardize that. I'm so sorry. I don't know, Sandy. I can begin to understand the first time you thought I was having an affair, but not the second time. One mistake is a mistake, but you kept cheating, and worst of all, you constantly lied to me. How can I trust you again? I got up from the table and left the house. I checked into a motel and lay in bed all weekend, thinking. I could understand the initial betrayal during the surprise birthday and perhaps could move past it, but I didn't see how I could forgive the ongoing betrayal. I tried to look at it from her point of view, and I could understand caring for a good friend, especially one who was actually there in her time of need, but betraying your husband in the process. She says she doesn't love him, but she broke our vows and had sex with him, so she should care about him more than me. Did I come to her mind during all this? Has she completely forgotten about me, or do I mean so little to her that she chose him instead of me? My thoughts were spinning, and I kept returning to the same point. Do I still love her? I have to admit that yes. There was never anyone other than Sandy for me. She's my soulmate, and maybe that's part of the reason it hurts so much. It hit me right in the heart, and it's really hard for me to separate the pain of what my next step should be. I'm really angry at Sandy and would like to strangle her for what she did, but not her personally. I really don't want to hurt her. So what does this mean? Can I forgive her? No. Is this possible over time? Maybe. Do I think I could divorce her and 10 years later be a miserable, sullen old man regretting not giving our marriage a chance? My head hurts. I ultimately decided that it was too much for me, and maybe I was so hurt and angry that I couldn't be objective about it all. I know that I still love her, although my love has been greatly diminished by her betrayal. I know I don't want to hurt her. Do I think she did this on purpose? No. Do I think she's just a victim of circumstance? Hell no. She knew what she was doing. She knew it was wrong. Do I want revenge? I don't want to hurt her, but I want her to feel my pain, to understand how much it hurt me. Is there enough pain and suffering already? Why else would I? Don't know. Damn, I keep going in circles, and all I get is more confusion. Maybe counseling will help me work through all my pain, anger, and confusion, whether or not it can save our marriage. I came home Sunday morning to find Sandy sitting on our couch. She looked terrible, and I couldn't help but feel a little sorry for her. She was obviously suffering too. But then I thought, okay, look what you've done. There were bags under her eyes. She didn't wear makeup, and she was dressed casually. It looks like she's given up. Well, welcome to my world. She looked at me but didn't say anything. I asked if she had had breakfast yet, and she shook her head in denial. I went into the kitchen, turned on the coffee maker, and started making us some French toast. I prepared everything and brought it out onto 2 plates on the table. Then he returned to the living room and told her that breakfast was ready. She turned to me, but made no effort to stand up. I walked up to her, took her hand, and told her that she needed to eat. She allowed me to lead her to the kitchen table, and after watching me eat a few bites, she began to eat. I cleared away the dishes and sat down at the table, saying that I was still thinking about it. I understand all this, and it is still difficult to understand how she could do this to us. She asked if I was going to divorce her. I replied that I didn't know. I said that I was trying to find a way to come to terms with everything that she did, and so far I couldn't. I just can't think of a way for us to move forward together. She lowered her head and tears streamed down her cheeks. I said that I always loved her and only her. I never even looked at other women because I had the perfect wife and the perfect marriage, or so I thought until a few days ago. Now I don't know what I know. I don't know what is real and what is just fantasy. My thoughts keep spinning and I always come back to the same point. Sandy, right now I have no idea what the future holds, but I know that before all of this, I loved you with all my heart and wanted to grow old with just you. I don't have the answers, but I think I'm ready to try counseling to help us understand how we got to this point, and if there is some way to move forward together. No promises, and we could end up in a bunch of counseling sessions and still end up getting divorced. But it won't be because of us. Didn't try. It was like turning on a light. She looked at me and smiled the biggest smile, jumped up and rushed towards me with open arms. I raised my hand and stopped her, reminding her that there were no promises or guarantees and that this might not lead to anything. She had a huge smile on her face and said, "At least you're willing to fight for this marriage. I would totally understand if you told me to go to hell, that you didn't want to see me anymore and called me all sorts of horrible things. Names, I would deserve all this. I know that I hurt you terribly, and it kills me inside. I would rather die than see you suffer, but this is exactly what I did. I love you very much, and I will do everything in my power to win back your love." I discussed some rules with her. We will live in the same house, but sleep in different rooms. We will continue to communicate respectfully and respect each other's privacy. No contact with her love-a-sheep, she agreed without objection. We sat together, not touching, at my laptop, looking through the profiles of marriage counselors in our area. We chose a woman about our age and decided to make an appointment. Sandy called, and we were given an appointment for Tuesday at 3 p.m. We both arrived and were ushered into her office at the appointed time. She seemed straightforward and no nonsense, which suited me, although Sandy seemed a little scared. Judy, that was her name, started by discussing some ground rules. It was about what I expected. Then she asked each of us to tell us why we were sitting in her office. She asked Sandy to start, and she covered everything pretty well without trying to avoid taking responsibility for her actions or hiding anything. I would say almost the same thing, although perhaps I would add a few accusatory words. Judy then asked me to tell my version, but I said that Sandy had already described it pretty well, although she could not convey the anger and pain that I felt during all these events. Judy said, "Well, that's a good start. Often one or both parties do not take responsibility for their actions and mostly want to discuss how disgusting their spouse is. I think we can make progress, although we don't know what the end results of our efforts will be." She asked us to take time over the next week to list our expectations for our sessions and not share that list until our next meeting. She also asked each of us to do one act of kindness a day for each other for the next week. It didn't have to be anything grand, just something that someone else could recognize as an act of kindness. We both agreed and scheduled the next meeting for next Tuesday. The week went a little better. Damn it, I really wanted to hate her, but it was obvious that she was trying really hard and doing a few small gestures of kindness every day while I did my mandatory one daily thing, and that was it. We met up with Judy again, and she asked how her week had been. Sandy said it was much better, and she really appreciated the gestures of kindness I showed every day. I said it wasn't bad, but I felt a little bad for not trying harder. She then asked each of us to read our list of expectations. Sandy started and said that she had 3 main results that she was hoping for. They were: the first and most important thing is that I could find a way forward and restart our marriage. She said she knows it won't be easy, but rather a long and difficult road, but she is willing to do whatever it takes to make it happen. Second, she hoped that I would someday start loving her again like I did before she was so wrong. She said she doesn't expect me to ever forgive her. She doesn't deserve it, but maybe with time I can love her again. The third is to help her understand why she could do something so terrible to me. She said there was something evil in her that she didn't even know existed, but obviously it showed up. Otherwise, how could she hurt someone she loved more than life itself so badly? Judy complimented her on her list and said that although it was difficult, she didn't think it was impossible, and with both of us here, she thought there was a chance of achieving all of her goals. She then asked me to share my list. I started with, I need to deal with my anger and pain. I said it consumes me and overshadows everything else. I can't get over it and start thinking rationally. I need Sandy to explain to me how she can say she loves me and then cheat and lie to me not just once, but for months. This doesn't make sense to me. I doubt her honesty and love and don't see how I could ever trust her again. Explain to me the path to reconciliation. I still love my wife, not like I used to, but I still have love for her. But I can't live with constantly wondering who she's talking to on the phone when she says she's going shopping. Is she really meeting her lover? Constantly doubting, questioning, and suspecting. Judy thanked me and said she understood why I included those 3 points to the list, and although it is very difficult to decide, with my active participation, achieving each of my goals is possible. Judy suggested we spend the next week meeting with each of us individually and set dates and times. The next week went a little better, except for one incident. Sandy and I were in the living room when her cell phone rang. She picked up the phone and answered when her eyes widened, and she threw the phone hard on the floor, looking at me. I immediately realized who was calling. Sandy burst into tears and looked at me, immediately starting to say that it was he, and that she had already told him at work to never talk to her or call her again. She said she didn't want anything to do with him and had already requested a transfer to another department so they wouldn't see each other at work. She desperately wanted me to believe her and kept saying that she told him to never talk to her again. I couldn't help myself and got up from the couch, walked outside to my car and drove away, leaving Sandy sobbing loudly behind. After a few beers and rethinking the evening's events, I came to the conclusion that I might have believed what she was saying, but it had reopened my wounds and made them bleed. I returned later in the evening and went straight to my room, closed the door and didn't say a word to her. The tension remained for the rest of the week. When I met with Judy for our one-on-one session, she already knew about the phone incident and immediately asked me to tell my side of the story. I told her what happened and my reaction. She asked why I reacted that way. Did I believe her story? I thought for a moment and admitted that she did seem surprised and shocked. And yes, she was probably telling the truth. Judy asked if I thought Sandy had told me the whole truth. And again, I admitted that I didn't think she was hiding anything important. She then asked why I was so upset and why I couldn't discuss it with Sandy immediately after the incident. I accepted that the pain and anger had returned immediately, although I hadn't realized that it had subsided a bit over the past couple of weeks. but that evening it came back with a vengeance. My emotions took over, and my mind became chaotic, and apparently I just ran away. I don't think I was angry enough to hurt Sandy, but I couldn't bring myself to stay and face the situation. I told her that I don't consider myself a coward, but for some reason I just can't face her with all this pain and anger inside me. Judy said she understood and that we needed to resolve this issue first before we could move forward, and offered to do a few more individual sessions with me before we met with Sandy again. At the next meeting, which was just Judy and I, she asked if I still loved Sandy. I thought for a moment and said that love still remained. She asked if this love was enough to build on. I replied that I think that's enough. That's why I'm here. She asked if I wanted to stay married to Sandy. I replied that that was the big question. If I could ever forgive what she did, I thought there was a real chance for us. But the big question for me was whether I could ever get to the point of not constantly asking questions, not doubting and not suspecting, not monitoring her constantly. I don't see how I could live this way. Judy said, "Trust her again," and I said, "Exactly." She said, "So if you can get to the point where you can start to trust her again, you see a path forward to continue the marriage." I answered yes. She asked if I was comfortable revealing this to Sandy at our next scheduled meeting together. Again, I answered in the affirmative. I also told her that I appreciated our sessions and that they helped me put aside my anger and pain and focus on what was truly important. I still had trouble thinking rationally about lying and cheating, but I was starting to think beyond and into the future. After a few additional individual sessions, Judy scheduled our next session together, and I have to admit, I was nervous. It felt like we were approaching some kind of decision point or end, and I still didn't know what I wanted. In our session together, I could tell that Sandy was just as nervous as I was. Judy started by saying that the individual sessions were very helpful, and we had both made progress in resolving our individual issues, and she believed that we could now begin to resolve our joint issues. She said that we both agreed to share information with each other from our individual sessions, and this indicated a level of trust and commitment to the process. Judy then recounted a summary of our individual sessions, starting with me, and told Sandy about my main issues with trust and forgiveness, but most of all with trust. Judy asked Sandy about her comments, and Sandy said she understood and would do the same if the roles were reversed. Sandy said she was willing to do whatever I asked to begin the healing process and restore my faith in her. She said if I wanted her to wear an electronic ankle bracelet, she would agree. If I don't want her to leave the house without me, she will also agree to whatever I ask. I replied that you can't live like that, and this is not marriage, but slavery, and I wouldn't do this to her. I appreciated her willingness to go to extremes to restore trust, but this was not the way to go. I saw tears running down her cheeks. Judy then told me that Sandy had made progress in understanding how she could have allowed her actions to jeopardize their marriage. Judy said that the surprise birthday party incident had affected Sandy far more than even Sandy realized, and while she might have been expected to hold on to her marriage even tighter, she also felt extremely responsible to Mr. Ames for his actions in her support. Sandy understands that sex with him was wrong, but it was out of desperation and pain and had nothing to do with loving you. She admits it was wrong, but believes it was truly a temporary mental disorder. The ongoing betrayal was more complicated. She again admits that it was wrong and that it was her fault, but the reason behind it had to do with her sense of obligation to someone who she felt was a great friend who gave everything to be there and support her in the moment. Great need. She just couldn't bring herself to give up him when the show it seemed that he found himself in a similar situation. She is still trying to understand why she allowed this to continue. She insists that it wasn't about love or sex or a desire for thrills, but rather about comforting a good friend in his hour of need in the best way she could. She firmly believes that this did not affect or diminish her love for you, and as soon as her friend was healthy enough, the betrayal would have ended and would not have happened again. I listened carefully, and then Judy asked me to speak. I turned to Sandy and asked why she didn't talk to me to admit the mistake as soon as possible and let us work on it together. She didn't come to me with a confession, but I had to find out for myself. After the surprise birthday party incident, she realized how she felt when she thought I was having an affair and how much pain it caused her, and then did the same thing to me. For real. She must have known how much pain she would cause me when I found out, and yet she continued. You chose to share yourself with him and break our vows. You chose him over me. Sandy almost screamed. No, I didn't choose him over you. There was never a question in my mind about who I want to spend the rest of my life with. Only you, only you. I was stupid and only saw the pain George felt when I thought you would leave me. I thought I could help him, and you'd never know, so it wouldn't affect you. If I stopped and thought about it, I would never do it because you might find out, and I can't bear the thought of hurting you. All this because I was trying to do something really nice and throw my wife a surprise birthday party. She ended up comforting her friend. The session turned into an emotional meltdown, and Judy suggested ending the meeting early and meeting again at the next scheduled meeting. I spent the next week in deep thought and hardly slept. I ultimately made my decision on the way to our next session. Judy greeted us when we arrived, and after we sat down, I told her I had made my decision. I said I still love my wife, not as much as before all this, but the love is still there. I believe I can forgive her for a weekend with an unexpected holiday. I can understand how emotional she was, especially after going through it myself. I can even begin to understand the reason for her subsequent infidelity and believe that she did not get into it on purpose. Despite all this, the question remains, can I continue our marriage without constantly wondering, without worrying about what she is doing or where she is and who she is with? This is not the life, and certainly not the one I want to live. I just don't think I can. I really wish I could, and to be honest, I also wanted another solution, but there was just too much damage. Sandy, I know you were hoping for a different solution, and frankly, so was I, but the damage is too great. It's been over 2 years since that fateful, surprise birthday party weekend. We split everything equally and Sandy didn't contest the divorce. We heard that George Ames quit his job and moved out of the area shortly after he tried to call Sandy. We never heard from him again. Did I make the right choice? The devil knows. I found an apartment closer to work. I don't go out much and have almost no social life. I'm just not interested in dating or even socializing like I used to. But I have to say that Sandy called me a few weeks ago, and we talked on the phone a few times, and it wasn't bad. I felt almost no anger or pain. The conversation was pleasant, and we talked about what was going on in our lives and other everyday things. It seems like her life is just like mine. She says she hasn't dated anyone and isn't really interested in a social life. The last time we spoke, she even suggested we meet for dinner. You know, I think I'll call her and set up a meeting. I know we can't go back to what we had before, but maybe we can start a new relationship. To be honest, I still care about her. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.